Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening. I've covered this conversation before. I covered this topic before. We kind of went over this, but I think it's important for us to go over this one more time, especially when it comes to slavery. And I know you guys have been bombarded with modern day slavery, with translated slavery, with chattel slavery, with colonization, and what this all means. I mean, for a very long time, especially as Black Americans, we've been talking about this, making sure that the world does not forget the atrocities of all these Western powers that enslaved our people. And yes, there's evidence, there's a lot of information out there that pretty much says a great amount of us was sold into slavery by our own people. So that is a fact, okay? We know that to be a fact. But there's some information I would like to kind of go down a timeline and break these things down, because when we think about slavery and we're thinking about colonization, most of us kind of link it right towards the British. We kind of blame the British right off the back, so to speak. And I can tell you, family, that the British didn't start slavery in the way that it was economically viable for Portuguese, or Portugal rather, and also Arabic people. Now, the first form of slavery, believe it or not, and I'm going to show you some receipts here. When we talk about the translated slave trade, so the Portuguese dominated the early translated slave trade on the African coast in the 16th century. As a result, other European nations first gained access to enslaved Africans through privateering, doing what's Portuguese rather than through direct trade, okay? Now, there's some information that suggests that slavery actually started back in the 1440s, but mostly dealing with the Arabics back in Egypt, okay? It states here that slavery in North Africa dates back to ancient Egypt. Now, for a while, ancient Kemet, whatever names you want to use to describe Africa, and that continent was actually conquered. I believe he was a Greek emperor or some Africanus. We're not going to really get into the debate of history and things of that nature. I'm just kind of building a timeline. But slavery in North Africa dates back to ancient Egypt. Now, if you go inside the pyramids in Egypt, you will see that they had dark colored people, and then they started to change to white colored people, but they continue to reveal fossils and all these ancient artifacts that show that Africa in general was melanated people, my skin tone and maybe a couple of shades lighter, but not to the point where people are looking mixed or people are looking white, okay? That lacks melanation or an abomination or an albino, okay? So that's what we have to keep in mind. It states that the New Kingdom from 1558 to 1080 BC brought in large numbers of slaves as prisoners of war up the Nile Valley and used them for domestic and supervised labor, okay? What's supervised labor? That's slavery, okay? You're being supervised in the work that you're doing and you're not getting paid. And of course, they was in shackles because they would run away. So when it comes to slavery, family, I would have to go with the Arabics that firstly started it in North Africa. That's why North Africa is labeled the Arab Emirates, okay? North Africa is labeled the Arab Emirates, and those countries like Morocco and Algeria. When you look at the northern part of Morocco and Algeria, There are white skin colored people. They just look like white people. Okay. Some of them are brown colored tone with different color eyes, brown eyes, light brown eyes, etc. But when you go to southern Morocco, you start seeing people like me, and other sort of melanated people. Okay. So let's just start off there with the Arabics, and then by way of the Portuguese starting to translate the slave trade, when we start using logistics to move these slaves to bring a workforce to other parts that essentially didn't have slavery on a tall toll as the Arabics once did. And that's the Portuguese sort of way, right? We don't want to do the work. We know masonries, we know people who do irrigation. They have been the first people on earth. So let's use them, their technology, their wits, their crafts, and let them build our wonderful cities in Europe, like the Portuguese, right? Now, if we continue on, the people who sort of put gasoline on the fire, who propelled the translated slave trade, were the British. Now, the British literally has been credited with essentially taking over the world or ruling the world. Now, in today's society, I would like to believe that America has done that, because of influence, because of our military prowess, our military positioning around the world. We have military bases in Europe. We have military bases in Africa. We have military bases in Asia. We in other countries that we have military bases in. Let's take, for instance, Korea. Let's take, for instance, Cuba. They do not have military bases in America. So I really credit Britain with essentially conquering the world. Because first and foremost, majority of the world speaks English. If you go to other countries, there are some words, because of inventions and creations and technology, they can't even say it in their language. They have to say it in English. Okay. We're going to be here for a while, family. I want to break this down. I don't want to rush through it. I kind of want to take my time. I want to make sure that my family, my sons, can go back and look at this for historical lessons to understand how these things came to be. It says here that Britain's involvement in the translated slave trade officially began with royal approval, and that simply means government approval, because the royals were the government back in those kings and queens time in medieval Europe, okay, in 1663. And it says in less than 150 years. They kind of make it sound like it's okay. Oh, in less than 150 years, Britain was responsible for transporting millions of enslaved Africans to the colonies in Americas, where men, women, and children were forced to work on plantation and denied basic rights. Okay. But again, I'm not highlighting Britain by themselves. Again, we have to highlight the Arabics. We have to highlight the Portuguese. We have to highlight the Dutch. We have to highlight the French. I mean, there's so many Western European countries that was a part of the slave trade and who had slaves. And on top of that, and not only that, countries that Great Britain, excuse me, I want to take away the great, that Britain colonized actually had slaves themselves and allowed those people to enslave Africans as well. I know that was very simple. I know that wasn't too deep. Let's take, for instance, India. India was colonized by the British, and then when they were released, so to speak, or they gained their independence, Indians also took over the slaves as well as property, and they continued to enslave us. But after a while, the Indians allowed, and this is the country of India, the Indians allowed the release or the freedmen, so to speak, in India to be part of the royal guard, to be part of the kingdom, so to speak. But we're not going to go that way too fast, okay? It also says here that the Slavery Abolish Act of 1833 formally freed roughly 1 million Africans who were then the legal property of Britain's slave owners. And you can go reference this story from theguardian.com. Now, I want you to put that into context, family, that even though they were formally freed from their shackles and bondage, that they were still legal property of Britain's slave owners. That is where we get this whole indentured servitude thing from. Yeah, so Britain kind of ended slavery kind of 30 years, 30 plus years before America, but not really. Like it's really a weird conundrum where you free, but you're still property of somebody else. That's still slavery. Okay. And we have to understand the reason why Britain essentially freed them is because they was colonizing Africa at the time. And Africa is a place where all the resources were then and they are now. So they say, well, we really don't need these slaves in England. We need service so we can free them so we look like, better than who we are because we're still atrocious, demonic, this horrible people. But it can look good on the world stage. But we're going to colonize where they come from and take their resources. We're going to take their resources and use them up as much as we can. And this is why Western countries, including America, are the most powerful countries and the most richest countries in the world. So when we look at Africa and these dilapidated countries and shanty towns and the way our ancestors and our people are essentially living, this is the cause. This is the cause. Because when it comes to modern day technology, if you look at foundational Black Americans, we are descendants, okay, from those people. And even before that, they invented the sundial. They did irrigation. They came up with all of these technological advances prior to British, French, Portuguese, Dutch, the list goes on, involvement. Okay, we were already making headways prior to them even coming to the continent. Yes, sir. Let me move on. So when we think about the British so-called empire, but when we think about the UK, these are the countries that even in Europe that England essentially conquered and put them under the UK. Because don't forget, the Queen of England, Elizabeth II, was the queen not only of England, but the queen of the United Kingdom. I know you guys have been seeing that viral video from Ireland talking about Lizzie's in a box. That is because they understand that Northern Ireland falls under British rule. So you got Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. And I know you guys have seen the movie with Mel Gibson, Braveheart. I think he was Scottish in that movie, and he didn't want to yield to British rule. See, they was telling us their history, especially Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, all these other countries, of what Britain did, of the conquering of they did. It's kind of like, even though the Arabic started, the Portuguese profit off the logistics of slavery and enslaving people themselves. But the British is the ones like, you know what, we can kind of do this better than everyone else. So let's go ahead and start our own empire and really ramping up the fire on this to get things moving. And that's the way we have to kind of look at this. We're going somewhere, family. We're going somewhere. Now, it states here, when did the British Empire start and end? The British Empire began its formative years in the 16th century, okay, back in 1663, and flourished and grew dramatically, lasting until the 20th century. And family, 21st century. 21st century. Because till this day, England, Britain, the UK still has 14 Commonwealth countries under its rule. And more than half of those countries are melanated countries, mostly in the Caribbean. But we're going to go down a tall tale list. At the height of the British Empire, how many countries did it have under its rule? And the only reason, and a lot of you are like, man, how did the British Empire grow so large so fast? What did they do did other countries didn't do? Well, the one thing they invested in was war, was carnage. They developed advanced weaponry, especially with the help of the Chinese and the black powder, also known as gunpowder. They had super fast advancements of war. They had metal. They had all sorts of protection, canopies. They invested their time and money in war so they can pollute, pillage, destroy, and conquer lands across the entire globe. And this is what they have done. And that's why a majority of the world speaks English. Doesn't matter what form, you speak English. And when we talk about some of the Americas, even like in South America, don't you know there's countries in South America that don't speak Spanish, they speak English? Like a country like Guyana, not the G-U-I, but the G-U-Y-A-N-A, that Guyana in South America. Let's move on. Let's move on. Now, just like anything else, family, I like pointing out definitions. All right, I like to bring relevance and context to things. What is colonization? Establishing control over the indigenous people of an area. Okay, but when we're talking about control of the indigenous people of that area, family, we're not just talking about you controlling them. Nope. We're talking about you controlling their government, you controlling their resources, and most importantly, you control their economics. So not only do you have the transatlantic slave trade going on at the time of people being logistically placed around the globe for free labor, aka slavery, but at the same time, the British, the French, and the Dutch are colonizing the entire continent of Africa. And the most important thing, besides economics of colonization, is colonization of the mind, where they come in and for generations colonize your country, colonize your people, and you begin to believe that you're one of them. You don't look like them. You're not built like them. You don't smell like them. But when you start to think like them, that is when you have been colonized. I saw some video clips that I'm not going to show here, family, of people in Africa, people in the Caribbean crying because the Queen Elizabeth passed away. Do you know how shocking that is? Do you know how grotesque that was for me to see these same countries mourn the death of their colonizer, mourn the death of their enslaver? Because here's the thing, if your country is being controlled on each and every level, your minds are being controlled, your government is being controlled, your economics is being controlled, your resources are being controlled, you are in slavery. It may not be as bad as American slavery, whip, chain, hung, burn. They let you build cities, they burn them, they bomb them, they castrate your men, they rape your women, they put the woman above the men. They Jim Crow era where they pretend like they give you freedom, but you really don't have it. It may not have been as bad as that, but somewhat on the same terms. And of course, when it comes to the African continent, the closest country that I can believe that came to what we know as American slavery is South Africa with apartheid. That's why we have a lot of similarities in the way we think about fighting against the system of white supremacy. This is important. Okay? So let me move down here. What does colonization mean? It means process of establishing foreign control over targeted territories. Now, here's the big kicker, family. Here are the countries that the British Empire ruled at one point or another. Let's look at this list. I'm going to go down very, very quickly. I don't want to bore you, but look at these countries. Now, up here it states the list of countries that have gained independence from the United Kingdom. Okay, of course, you know, America is in there because we were one of the colonies. We were one of the commonwealths of Britain. So you have Afghanistan, Antigua and Barbados, the Bahamas, Bahrain, Barbados, Belize. And here are some of the other names. Like if you look at Belize, family, it used to be called British Honduras. Okay, you'll see these names beside it, but I'm just going to name the countries that we know of today. You have Cyprus, Dominica, Egypt, the Gambia, Ghana, Grenada, Guyana. Again, I told you about that one. Okay, India, the British India. See, they always put British or new or something like that on top of it. Jamaica, Jordan, Kenya, Kuwait, I don't even know how to pronounce that one. Libya, Mali, Malaysia, Maldives, Malta, Mauritius, Nigeria, Oman, Pakistan, Qatar, St. Lucia, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Seychelles, Sierra Leone, Samoan Islands, Somaliland, South Yemen, Sri Lanka, Sudan, Tonga, Trinidad and Tobago, Uganda, United Arab Emirates, the United States of America, Zambia, Zanzibar, Zimbabwe. Okay. So we're looking at all of these countries, family, and we continue to see the reign and the stretch and the land masses that the British Empire was in control of at some time or another. And this is why when you go over to countries like England, France, you see these castles and you see some of their best areas are built. I mean, they look really pristine because they have the money from other countries. They have the resources of other countries to maintain and sustain that look and that prestige. They have a history of killing. They have a history of murdering. They have a history of taking control of land, people, and their resources. But they make you and I look like the savages. Can I say that again? They make you and I look like we're the savages. See, that's when you have to know that your mind is colonized, when you look at your own people as the enemy, but you don't look at the circumstances in the way they became or the way they become. You don't look at the circumstances. Now, people, oh, that was a long time ago. That's just an excuse. No, we still have modern day slavery, one. We still have modern day colonization, two. And we still have system of white supremacy in all of these Western European countries, especially America. But we would like to ignore that. And to bring a little bit light, I'm going to show you the other countries that is still under the British rule. Okay, still under British rule. Australia, as it should be, but don't forget, Australia had indigenous people that were melanated like myself, and that was and they're still under British rule. But the indigenous, the Aboriginal people of Australia are dark, melanated people. The Bahamas, and I'm seeing Bohemian people smiling and grinning that the Queen has come to visit one of her territories. Absolutely colonization of the mind, but colonization is slavery. We have Belize. The country is melanated. Canada, so as you be. Grenada, dark-skinned melanated people. Okay, are we counting these countries that are dark-skinned that are under British rule? Jamaica did come out with something saying they're going to break away and become a republic and break away from British rule. We shall see. New Zealand, Papua New Guinea. As you see, the gentleman here, he's Papua New Guinea. He's a dark melanated brother. Okay. We see St. Christopher and Nevis, dark melanated people. St. Lucia, dark melanated people. And Tallulah, they're kind of look more like indigenous, sort of like Hawaiian, and another mixture of people, but melanated people nonetheless. These are the countries that are still under British rule, by the way. So what does that mean? They actually have, until her death, Queen Elizabeth as the head of state, Queen Elizabeth as the queen of their country. And some people are stating, oh, no. She's not the head of state. She really doesn't have any power. No. She's just a figurehead. No. You don't roll out the red carpet for a figurehead. I bet you if I look at your financial books, I will see that resources are being diluted from the people of those countries and transported to the Western world, mostly the UK. There's some other things I want to show you here because we know that the largest diamond ever found, this is kind of just good to know. The largest diamond ever found that the queen, I believe, had on her scepter or on her crown came from South Africa. A lot of these countries have been colonized for hundreds of years, family. And we wonder why we have in this battle between certain African countries and foundational Black Americans, aka U.S. freedmen. We see why we're having these battles. And they continue to tell us we're Akatas and all these very, defaming names, so to speak. And they say, you guys are Akatas, you guys were the slaves. No, colonization is slavery. Anytime somebody controls your country, they can lock up your people at any time they want. They can take your resources without impunity or without because they own and operate the justice systems. You don't believe that you're in slavery? And then you come over here with a colonized mind, and then people of your country are mourning the death of their colonizer, and you're telling me you're not enslaved? Shout out goes to my brothers and sisters in South Africa for always putting it on point, especially Julius Malema with the EEF. And a lot of I learned a lot of white South Africans, they don't like Julius Malema. I wonder why. It kind of reminds me of Jim Crow. It kind of reminds me of all of our freedom fighters. Not just your Malcolm X, not just your Martin Luther King, not just your Neely Fullers, okay? Not just your Huey P. Newtons, not just all of them, family. Not just your Nat Turners, those who continue to revolt and revolutionize and organize to fight against the system of white supremacy. Let me move on. Now, here is a clip that I found. Shout out goes to Tariq Nasheed on posting this one, of how they're now trying to steal the reparations claim, not only for Black Americans, but also African and Caribbean countries who are owed reparations from Europe. They're now stating because these white supremacists at the time lost slaves and slavery was ended, that they should be owed reparations. I want you guys to hear this loud and proud. Let me play this.
You have all of this vast wealth. Those are legitimate concerns.
Well, I think you're right about reparations in terms of if people want it, though, what they need to do is you always need to go back to the beginning of a supply chain. Where was the beginning of the supply chain? That was in Africa. And when across the entire world, when slavery was taking place, which was the first nation in the world that abolished slavery? The first nation in the world to abolish it. It was started by William Wilberforce, was the British. In Great Britain, they abolished slavery. 2,000 naval men died on the high seas trying to stop slavery. Why? Because the African kings were rounding up their own people. They had them on cages waiting in the beaches. No one was running into Africa to get them. And I think you're totally right. If reparations need to be paid, we need to go right back to the beginning of that supply chain and say, who was rounding up their own people and having them handcuffed in cages? Absolutely. That's where they should start. And maybe, I don't know, the descendants of those families where they died in the high seas trying to stop the slavery, that those families should receive something too, I think, at the same time.
It's an interesting discussion, Hillary. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
This is absolutely crazy.
To discuss
and your boy, Don Lemonade didn't even check her on it. Didn't he check her on the fact? See, that's the thing about CNN, family. If you are just tuning in to CNN because you're a Democrat, you're being colonized by mass media. Every morning, my wife and I, we go to the gym. We listen to Fox, HLN, CNN. We want to be exposed to the rhetoric. We want to be exposed to the propaganda that these news agencies, so we can combat them. So we can speak against truth to power. That's the only way that we can get out of these colonized minds, whether you're here in America, the Caribbean, or the continent of Africa, or even in the UK and Europe. This is the only way. You have to call out these lies. Because all of these white people that was in support with the system of slavery, and because they lost their property, people who was the source of their wealth and land, that they're owed reparations as well. And if you guys did not notice, you saw that it says Prince Charles inherits majority of the wealth of the English royal family, now takes over his father's $1 billion estate. Let me tell you something. See, they threw that number up there to have you to believe that the British Empire is only worth $1 billion because they said his father's $1 billion estate. No, they're talking about where his father lived at. Okay, that's worth $1 billion. But the kingdom and the castles and all that bullshit that's over there, that stuff is worth trillions of dollars. I went over to London not a couple of years ago, more like a decade ago, and I visited the crown jewels. Beautiful gems and sapphires and rubies and diamonds and all of these things. The crown alone is probably worth $1 billion. The crown with the purple velvet fabric or whatever, the crown alone is probably worth $1 billion. That empire will never fall unless people rise up. That's all I'm going to say. Let me see what's going on. What's going on, Jermaine? Family B1 to you, brother. Black first. We got, he says, good afternoon. We got David D. Crowder. Good afternoon, brother, as well. We got Victoria. She says, because we're not in chains or being whipped, people swear we're free. And we're absolutely not free. And here's another thing, family. You get your reparations. Don't forget, you're still under the system of white supremacy. But that don't mean that you can't build anything. Let's keep that to the forefront of our minds. When you get your reparations, one, that doesn't mean that you're still not in the system of oppression and white supremacy, but it still doesn't mean that you can't build generational wealth for your family. Let me move on. I just kind of went on Twitter before I get into this next clip here, and I wanted to see what people were saying about, the Queen Elizabeth death, colonization, all of these things. I think it's just really entertaining to know this, right, fam? Let me blow this up for you guys. I'm gonna show you what some people were stating. Now, Jaro Funes, a PhD, he said colonization. He said atrocities of England and the British Empire. 1, colonization of Ireland. 2, colonization of 25% of the world. Now, I'm pretty sure this guy has maybe a connection to Ireland because there was more colonization than just Ireland, but he probably has some connection to them. He said 25% of the world. 3, transatlantic slave trade. 4, opium wars. 5, violent repression, the Mau Mau uprising. And then 6, famine in India. You know why? You know why famine in India? Because they were taking their damn resources and letting the Indians starve. And then when I see Indian folk over here in America, they have anti-black racism against black Americans. I'm like, your skin just as dark as mine, and your people was colonized as well. Oh, that's right. You guys own slaves as well. That's right. That's right. Because I did a video on how India actually had slaves. Then they freed them from slavery and allowed them to be royal guards. There was even an Indian. Let me take that back. It was even a black Indian who became emperor, who became king of India. But they will not like to tell you that because there's even colorism in India. It's kind of like anywhere else. In the north, the light-skinned Indians look down on the dark-skinned Indians in the south. And they don't even know where they got their mind frame from. That is colonization of the mind, where these European powers and all of these different countries around the world were spewing their anti-black racism. And I don't just mean American black, African black. I mean color of your skin black. The whiter you were, that's why when you go to Korea, you see all of these Korean girls putting on white foundation, making themselves whiter. When you go to Japan, the Gishi, you see all, and I've been to all of these countries. I'm telling you, family, I've been to all of these countries, so I saw it firsthand. They're putting all this white makeup on of a sign of purity, of a sign of a social status then higher than the darker melanated people, because that's mostly related to slavery and dog and akatas. Let me move on. I want to show this, family. I want to show this. There'll never be a day in this life I mourn the passing of colonizers. Thank you, sister. I believe she has a Nigerian name, probably a rider, probably don't call us akatas. I don't know yet. There'll never be a day in the life I mourn the passing of colonizers, especially any from the British monarchy. People quick to celebrate the Queen must be either unaware or understating the negative impacts of colonization that the Caribbean countries like my own still feel. So she's from the Caribbean, but she does have an African name. Let me continue on. Queen Elizabeth II passes on. Growing up so long after independence, we only correlate her with British colonization and bigotry. She didn't have the grace to apologize, make amends, or show regret for all the heinous crimes the empire committed against India. Against India, yes. That's my point. So there are some Indians who know of the colonization of their country, but you only have a few of them speak out against it. Let me continue. King Charles III is now head of the state in 14 countries outside the UK. We went over that. Look at this sister here. Kings, queens, and princesses and princes belong in fairy tales, not in Jamaica. Here we go. This is one of the countries on the list. My dear fellow Somaliland citizens, please stop the glorification of British colonization. We were a protectorate. We made no difference to the British. In their eyes, you were a savage to them. We were never colonized. Here's a damning evidence. It has no audio, though. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. This was an article calling for the end of colonization of Ireland and demanding the British should make the complete liberation of the Irish from colonial and imperialist oppression their highest priority, but go off. See, this is what I'm talking about, family. So there are some people out there who understand the colonization of the land, but the government, high-ranking officials, rich people, they won't speak out against it because they know it's going to hurt their bottom line, because they operate in that system of white supremacy that feeds their pockets, that keeps them in power, that keeps them rich. That's why you won't see too many people talk out against it. And let me just go back to one more thing up here, one of my first readings. I love what this guy right here, Gerald, said. Hold on. It refreshed on me, family. It refreshed. Let me say what this Indian guy said. I want to see what these Indians are saying. India was colonized only by the British, but also by Islam. Strangely, U.S. academia gets wound up a knot when Indian Hindus dare to speak about their experience of colonization by Islam. Okay, he's talking about Islam. Everybody talking about colonization. Okay. It states here, for those of you who thought British colonization of Black people was a thing of the past, watch King Charles being proclaimed as the sovereign of the Bahamas. Let's look at this, family. Can we look at this? I want to look at this. I want to hear it. I want to look at it.
With the president.
Let me blow this up for you guys.
And members of the Senate, the Speaker, and members of the House of Assembly, and the members of the late Majesty's Privy Council in the realm of the Commonwealth of Bahamas, with one voice and consent, publish and proclaim that King Charles III, by the death of our sovereign, Queen Elizabeth II, is now formally proclaimed sovereign of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas.
Okay, I don't want to bore you with this, so to speak, but I want to read what this gentleman down here is stating. Thanks to British rule, India has trains. Period. On the other hand, look at Japan. They were not considered worthy of colonization by the British or any white Europeans, and that's why Japan has no trains, no technological advances of beautiful buildings. Wow. Wow. You see the justification of colonization? He's basically stating that colonization of India was a good thing. But you guys still love them white supremacists. I tell you, you still operate in the system, calling out the British monarch or history of imperialism and colonization. Black elves, black hobbits, black dwarfs, black Jedis, black mermaids, food with flavor. Things that make white people mad. Let me move on. So before I go to my modern day slavery video, what I want to do very quickly is point out the French as well, because we talked about the Arabics, we talked about the Portuguese, the Dutch, mostly the British, but we're going to talk about the French too, because there are still a lot of country under French rule. See, comment allez-vous? Je me situe à toi, vous. Oui, oui. Anyway, a little bit of French and fries. But the thing that gets forgotten in all of this is the colonization of countries under French rule, right? And you're talking about Mauritius, Senegal, Mali, Ivory Coast. Let's look at them, family. Let's look at them. Here we go. Now, a lot of these, of course, had different names when they were under direct French rule and not just French influence, but these countries are still under French influence. And let me tell you something, influence of a country can sometimes be more powerful than the rule. I told somebody this, and I had to break it down, but I know you guys are very intelligent. I said, influence is more powerful than position. He's like, what do you mean? If I'm the president, if I'm the king, and you're one of my advisors, and you're the most influential advisor, meaning that you are a great influence of my decisions, thoughts, and actions, then you essentially are more powerful than that position that I'm holding, because you are controlling me, right? Because great advisors who really control the kingdoms, really control the colonies back in the day, what they did was study the person they were advising, their likes, their dislikes, they with clothes, with fabrics, with food, with women, with men, whatever it may be. They study these people in order to influence and to control even them. So being influenced by a country that used to colonize you is, in my opinion, the same damn thing. Hopefully you get what I'm getting at. Let's go over some of these French countries that used to be colonized or still colonized to this day. Now, I'm not going to read all of that. We're going to get right down to the nitty gritty. We're going to go right to the country themselves. Okay. Let me blow this up for you guys. Here we go. Algeria, Benin, Burkina Faso, Cambodia, Cameroon, Canada, Central African Republic, Chad, Congo Republic. I'm going to skip some of these. Dominican Republic, Egypt, Gambia, Gabon, Grenada, Guyana, Indian, Haiti, Ivory Coast, Laos, Lebanon, Libya, Madagascar, Mali, Mauritius, Mexico, Morocco, Nigeria, St. Charles, Senegal, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, Syria, Tobago, Tunisia, United States, Vietnam, Yemen, and the list goes on and on and on. But some people do not believe that they have been colonized. Yeah, there's still countries who are colonized by the British, as we went over before. There's still countries that are colonized by the French. There are still countries that are colonized by the Dutch. There are still countries that are colonized by the Portuguese. As a matter of fact, did you know the national language, the official language of Mozambique, a country in East Africa, Southeast Africa, is Portuguese? Did you know Angola, a country in Southwest Africa, the official language is Portuguese? Did you guys know that? So the majority of languages other than the native tongue of those lands are English, French, Portuguese, and there's one country where one of the official languages that's in Southwest Africa is Spanish. It's Spanish. Now, I think it was Ethiopia that the Italians were trying to colonize, but they got their asses kicked. Okay. Now, I do want to show you a video of how modern day slavery still exists in the world. I mean modern day. I'm talking about 21st century. I'm talking about 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, etc. Let's go there now. Fair use, fair use.
Survived, hidden in plain sight.
And of course, the Flintstones is running my internet because either that or YouTube is slowing down the speed. But I wanted to show you this video of the colonization of the 21st century. Also, I'm not going to let the Arabics go because there's a lot of countries
Modern
like
slavery
Saudi
is a
Arabia
reality in
that's having that's having
countries.
slaves that
The
a lot of
international
African
community
workers are
has
going over there
adopted
being
various
trapped
laws
inside
to
of the
prevent
house.
it. But are they enough? How can the exploitation be stopped?
Went down to the
Hollywood movies show us the brutal history of slavery. But millions of people are still being trafficked around the world, ending up in forced labor or in the sex trade. The UN estimates more than 40 million people live in some form of slavery today. It's most common in poor or developing countries where laws are not enforced.
Da na je ni Saudiya a gaskiya an ɗauke mu an je an ajiye mu. An ce za a nema mana wanda za su ɗauke mu aiki. To, an zo an ɗauke mu aiki ana walaƙanta mutane. Kin gani? Bayan ana walaƙanta mu wani ma ƙarshenta zai ce shi ba aiki za ka mishi ba zai so ya yi lalata da kai.
But rich countries are no exception. In the United Kingdom, up to 13,000 people are working as slaves in private homes, brothels, nail bars, and cannabis farms. Thousands of migrants escape from Africa, taking dangerous journeys to build new lives in Italy. Instead, some are forced to labor 7 days a week in farms, producing around 36% of the EU's tomatoes. In Thailand's $7 billion seafood export industry, slave labor works in life-threatening conditions. Media report people who are sold into fishing operations, suffer starvation and sleep deprivation. They are even chained, beheaded, or thrown overboard if they make mistakes. Countries and international organizations are cracking down on the trade.
I believe this is a fight that we can win, but most importantly, this is a fight we have to win. You can't have 20 million people in modern times literally enslaved.
The Modern Slavery Act was passed in the United Kingdom in 2015, focusing on the prevention and prosecution of slavery. Big business in the UK now has to publicly report on how it tackles slavery in global supply chains. But the government has been accused of failing to protect the victims. Of the data collected on modern slavery in the UK between 2015 and 2016, it's thought that, at best, 28% of referrals resulted in police recording a crime. If consumers pay more attention to global supply chains, could the most vulnerable be saved from being exploited? Are laws in place enough to protect the victims? Or is it time for more proactive measures?
So, family, when we look at this, okay, when we look at this modern day slave trade, which they're not only using them, they're not only enslaving some of these African women and men within their homes in the Middle East and also in Europe. And I'm pretty sure a lot of this goes on in America, probably doesn't get as much publicity. That this is what's occurring, family. This is what's still occurring today. So when I hear melanated people from the continent of Africa speak on Black Americans, you guys still have a sex/slave trade of your people to a lot of these Middle Eastern and European countries, mostly. Because we've seen reports of a lot of our Black American girls, mostly women, that are getting kidnapped. And where do you think they're going, family? There's a international ring and there's a black market of melanated people that's still occurring today. Okay, that's definitely another video we need to get into the information and sources that I can reference to give you that info as well. And last but not least, colonization, other than European powers, are happening on a very large scale by the way of China. Now, there's other Asian countries in cahoots with China, but China is colonizing the entire continent of Africa. They're colonizing some countries in India, and the way they go about it is put them in kind of like these blood deals. And of course, a lot of the African people there know of them, because when I went to Ghana and I realized that the Chinese, Indians, as well as Lebanese people owned all the malls, owned all the dealerships, car dealerships. They literally owned everything. The only thing you saw is black faces in government, which is symbolism. Symbolism doesn't mean anything. Symbolism doesn't mean anything. Because if I have someone in a position, but they control nothing, then that's just symbolism. You have no power because we control your economics. So China, and I'm not stating all Chinese people. Okay, I'm not stating that. So let's just point out some flaws in my conjecture. I don't want to demonize the entire Chinese population because I'm not stating that. But Africa is now being colonized by the Chinese economically. They control a lot. And when I say control, they control and or own and operate majority of the resources in Africa, as well as the Caribbean. And guess who's next? America. That's right. America's next, because there's a lot of Chinese businessmen that own a lot of farmland next to Bill Gates that owns a lot of farmland in America. So family, I just wanted to point this out to you guys. It's kind of a revamp video that I did some time ago, but I want to get more in depth with it. Again, understand that even you have been assimilated into Western culture because they ripped us from our culture. They have ripped foundational Black Americans from their lineage. And there is some colonization, there is some assimilation of our minds that we still don't even understand why we do some of the damnedest things that we do. Because we have developed, we have adopted, some consciously, some unconsciously, of their lineage because of colonization and slavery. So the next time I hear anyone, doesn't matter, stating that you Akatas, you Niggas were slaves, just understand that colonization is slavery too.